and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, the commander of the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet being dismissed after multiple U.S. warships collided with other vessels in less than a year. Is the U.S. Navy still suited to providing the so-called security and stability in the waters of the Asia-Pacific? Four great contemporary inventions have come to define China, some say. They are online shopping, mobile payment, shared bicycles, and high-speed rail. Why has China adopted these innovations sooner than the others? We begin today's program with the latest accident involving a U.S. warship. The USS John McCain collided with a merchant vessel off the coast of Singapore this week. And then the commander of the 7th Fleet was fired after 4 accidents this year tarnished his reputation. The dismissal of a high-ranking officer for operational reasons is rare in the U.S. military. So does this mean the U.S. Navy is going to take responsibility for these incidents? Why did they not take precautions beforehand, some wonder, but only made remedies afterwards? Before our discussion, bringing in the Chinese and the U.S. side, let's take a look at this background.
4 collisions in less than 1 year. The commander of the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet has been relieved of his duty following this week's deadly collision between the destroyer USS John McCain and a merchant vessel east of Singapore. A U.S. Navy spokesman said the decision was made due to a loss of confidence in his ability to command. The U.S. Navy also ordered an operational pause for its fleet worldwide to make sure all steps are being taken to ensure safe and effective operations. It is the second serious collision in recent months, leaving 8 sailors still missing. In late January, the cruiser USS Antietam ran aground while trying to anchor in Tokyo Bay. On May 9th, the cruiser USS Lake Champlain was struck by a small fishing boat off the Korean peninsula. On June 17th, the destroyer USS Fitzgerald collided with a container ship off Japan, resulting in the deaths of 7 U.S. sailors. The string of accidents involving warships in Asia have sparked questions about the Navy's readiness and training. Admiral Scott Swift, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, made a speech to assure the media that they would investigate the root causes of the incidents.
One tragedy like this is one too many. And while each of these 4 events is unique, they cannot be viewed in isolation. I welcome the broad, comprehensive review announced by our Chief of Naval Operations.
The U.S. Navy has equipment that are the envy of its rivals. With such an advanced naval force in the Western Pacific, why do such incidents continue to occur? The reasons behind them are worth a look.
Before our discussion, let's introduce our guests today. What's wrong with the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet? As our panelist, Mr. Zhang Junshe, Senior Captain and also Vice President of the Naval Research Institute of China. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Joining us in Washington, D.C. In the U.S., we invited the retired Rear Admiral Mr. Terry McKnight, who is a 31-year veteran of the U.S. Navy. Mr. McKnight, welcome as well. I want to begin with you.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you, sir. Begin with you, sir. What do you think exactly happened? Why there has been a mishap 4 times in a row in less than a year?
Well, there's a lot to do, a lot of factors that are involved, but 2 of the key factors are training and readiness. The Navy over the last few years has depleted the training and readiness budgets, and we have seen an increase of these type of incidents. When you don't train and you don't pay, something like this is going to happen.
Well, I want to go to Senior Captain Zhang here in China. Of course, Asia-Pacific region, China is part of it. How do you see it from the Chinese Navy's perspective?
Well, I partly agree with the Rear Admiral as his idea on the reasons, the causes of these 4 mishaps. But I want to add 2. One is the carelessness of the U.S. Sailors on the ship. They didn't pay attention to the situation on the seas. Second, I think, is the non-compliance of the rules, long-established protocols, including the 1972 COREX, the Convention on the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea. So I think these are the main causes.
Well, go to you, Mr. Rear Admiral. Have all those procedures and rules been followed in this latest specific case?
Well, in this case, definitely not. In fact, in both cases, when you have collisions at sea, there's really only two possibilities. One, if you're in close quarters with another ship and a ship has a catastrophic casualty and just cannot avoid a collision. Or there's a total loss of seamanship, lack of leadership, and somebody is basically not paying attention. So in this case, it looks like that the call regs were violated. Fault, at least in the Fitzgerald's case. I know that we have not seen the initial results on the McCain, but in the case of the Fitzgerald, it is clearly that they did not follow the rules of the road.
Rear Admiral, what are some of the specific rules to avoid collision among ships, at least in the U.S. Navy? Some basic ones, help us to understand.
Well, this is right. So in the U.S. Navy, they follow the international rules of the road, like the senior captain said, the call regs. So it is every ship's responsibility to stay out of the way of other ships. There are, ships may be imperiled, cannot maneuver. Our ships are very maneuverable, and they should be able to get out of the way. So it's the responsibility of every vessel, merchant vessel, naval vessel, to stay out of the way of each other.
Rear Admiral, if I could just continue to ask a bit about that direction, there are reporting about specific rules on the ship. First of all, there's radar system that will be monitored to avoid any collision. Secondly, there are 5 different areas in which the onlookers should be out there and look at the other ships. Thirdly, there should be a stance in the front of the ship and also at the back of the ship. 2 places there will definitely be individuals at any time of the day to look out of any special situation. Some say, Mr. Rear Admiral, only those 3 layers of precautions all failed at the same time. Will one ship, such as those in the U.S. Navy, collide with other ships, whether commercial or military? What would you say?
Yes, I have to agree with that. When you have a collision, something has failed dramatically. And you have lookouts throughout the ship and you have radars. Somebody and some things were not paying attention, and to have a collision, if you have a lookout, especially on the after part of the ship in the case of the Fitzgerald, that after lookout should have been, just at the loudest voice he could possibly say, there's a ship here. And yes, definitely there was failure of not only, it was a human failure, but it could possibly be radars themselves.
Well, Senior Captain Zhang, from your experiences with the Navy, I know you've been doing decades of research in that regard. Does it mean that all the people that are on these posts have to be careless all at the same time, that the 3 preventional measures will fail all at the same time?
Well, I think at least the recent 2 mishaps which took place in June and this month show that the people on watch on the decks of the U.S. Navy naval ships may be careless because we know that apart to these radars and also the instruments you mentioned, actually modern ships, including the U.S. naval ships, have also the photo electro detection devices, and also they can use telescopes to keep on watch. So I think in the first accident mishap in June that happened at 1:30 in midnight. So the people may doze off when they are keeping on watch. And this time is early morning. So it was reported that maybe some young officers aged at 22 or 24 were on watch. And we know that that time maybe they also doze off.
I see. Mr. McKnight, is that a possibility?
Yes, that's a distinct possibility. We try to train our young officers, and I know in the case of the Fitzgerald, the most experienced commanding officer on the ship, the commanding officer, was not on the bridge, which was a failure of the officer to deck to inform the commanding officer to be on the bridge in that close quarter situation.
I see. So here is a question, Rear Admiral, we have to ask, at least from China's perspective. U.S. Navy has claimed to be guaranteeing the freedom of navigation in the Asia-Pacific region, South China Sea included. And yet, it is only the U.S. Navy over the past few months this year that have had big accidents like these. Many people died. American soldiers, their lives lost, but these could be civilian lives in other cases. So many people ask, should the United Navy to be here to begin with? Secondly, if they claim to what they have been doing, are they really fulfilling their responsibilities? Are they creating more danger rather than peace and stability in this region? Rear Admiral McKnight.
Right. Well, that's very good questions. First of all, we will always be out there. I mean, we adhere to the freedom of navigation and safety and stability throughout the world. So we will be in the 7th Fleet area. I think it is important for us to be out there. We are a global force. And I know that the Chief of Naval Operations and the fleet commanders will take a look at this situation very seriously and find out the root causes of that and to make sure that these events don't happen again. And I know that the Chief of Naval Operations is going to definitely find out this and take actions to make sure that these events don't happen again. And we will continue to sail.
If I could, Mr. Rear Admiral, those words were said after the first incident. Those words were said after the second incident. Those were said after the third, and now after the fourth. Who knows what's going to happen?
Right. Well, unfortunately, these incidents will happen. They should not happen in some cases. But I am assured, and I can assure you, that the Chief of Naval Operations has this as a top priority, and we will get to the bottom of this and figure out what we need to do to prevent these accidents from happening again. Well,
Senior Captain Zhang?
Yes. Well, I don't fully agree with the Rear Admiral, because we know that there is a different understanding of the some clauses in the UNCLOSes. For instance, the United States Navy has sent its ships to the South China Sea to carry out the so-called freedom of navigation operations in the territorial seas of China. And we think that this was a serious political and military provocation, because we know that freedom of navigation has never been a problem in the South China Sea. So we think that the U.S. naval warships have been to where they should not have been, and they have done what they should not have done, because especially the freedom of navigation operations are not necessary, because we know that one of the allies, the Philippines, its president has publicly said that the Philippines will not follow the United States in the joint patrols in the South China Sea. And recently, its foreign minister has said that the Philippines doesn't want to see the situation in the South China Sea to be tension or more tensions.
All right.
So
I think I seem to understand what you're trying to say. Two layers, Mr. Rear Admiral, to respond. One is that you're not supposed to hear. People are not welcoming you. That's one point, at least according to Senior Captain Zhang here. And secondly, when you are here, you're not careful. You're not taking care of the peace and stability here. You're creating trouble. So, Rear Admiral.
Well, I don't see it that way. I think that any vessel has the, as the senior captain mentioned, the rules of the road, the call regs, and there are it lays it out right in there, freedom of navigation and the restrictions that apply for any ship and any warship that sails the seas. I think there are people, countries in the region that want us to be there, and we will continue to be there for now and for the future.
The 7th Fleet is the largest U.S. Navy's forward deployed fleet. At any given time, there are roughly 50 to 70 ships and submarines, 140 aircraft, and some 20,000 sailors. For more than 70 years, the fleet has maintained a continuous forward presence in the Indo-Asia Pacific. Well, if that is what you are talking about, Mr. Rear Admiral, but I guess things have changed. We have also seen a lot of debates going on in the South China Sea and also involving the U.S. military's presence here. So after these incidents, what's going to happen? Where is the wind going to blow? Rear Admiral, your assessment here.
Oh, I think the winds are stable. I think that that our neighbors in that region still want us to be there, and like I said earlier, we will continue to be there. We have our allies have asked us to help them and assist them in military operations. We train with our allies out there, including the Chinese Navy. We've had them in several exercises before. So we will continue to operate in the 7th Fleet area for now and for many, many years to come.
But Rear Admiral, what if things like these happen again?
Well, I hope these accidents don't happen again, and that's why the Chief of Naval Operations directed all the fleet commanders to take a pause, look at their seamanship and navigation. How do they operate? How do they operate as teams? And to make sure that we get down to the basics and we take a hard look at what we're doing to make sure these type of incidents don't happen again.
Senior Captain Zhang, the 7th Fleet, of course, made their presence 70 years ago, and it continues to be there, but the role of the region and the logic of the region has been changing. So from China's perspective, what do you think about the presence of the 7th Fleet still in the region? In the future, how is China going to assess the security situation as a result of the recent incidents and as a result of determination expressed by Rear Admiral that it's going to be here and continuously to be here?
Well, I don't think any country, including China, wants to push the United States Navy, especially the 7th Fleet, out of this region. So long as they exist in this region, we hope that their operations will be conducive to peace and stability in this region. But we just said that many countries in this region, including its ally, the Philippines, don't want to see tensions arise in this region. So what we are opposed most is the so-called freedom of navigation operations conducted by the U.S. Navy, which intruded in the territorial seas of China. So long as the U.S. Navy conducted its patrols in the South China Sea, we are not opposed. So long as it doesn't intrude into the territorial seas of China.
All right. And my final question to both of you as well. Situations are getting ever more complicated in the region. If you look at the Korean Peninsula issue and some of the other issues in the South China Sea, Rear Admiral, when the assessment is being done by the U.S. Navy in the region, there's of course, quote unquote, an apparent lack of presence of U.S. ships on the water. How is the United States right now, particularly the Navy, assessing the security situation? Briefly from you.
Well, we're definitely looking at the security situation very, very hard. And like you said, we definitely need more ships, and hopefully that our budgets will increase to increase the number of ships we have. One of the concerns is that in this study that they're going to look at is maybe we don't have enough ships out there. I'd like to mention one thing, that in 2009 I was out in the counter-piracy task force, and I worked daily with Admiral Du, who was out there, and the Chinese task force, and we had a great working relationship. So we can work with the Chinese Navy. We've done it all over the world, and I think we can work to solutions to make sure we have peaceful operations throughout the world.
Senior Captain Zhang, what about the latest situation? Is Chinese Navy going to work with the U.S. Navy in this regard, even though there are differences between the two?
Yes, sure. Just as Rear Admiral says, that the Chinese and the U.S. navies have been conducting very good cooperation in the Gulf of Aden and waters of Somalia to conduct, to carry out escort and counter-piracy operations there. And we should control and manage our differences, and then we should seek cooperation in many more areas. So I think the more cooperation we carry out, I think the more stable the situation in this area will be.
It seems like there are different issues, and on different issues, different attitudes coming from different sides. Very interesting over there. Well, I would like to thank both of you, gentlemen, for being with us and sharing your insights and certainly your perspective. Rear Admiral Terry McKnight, Senior Captain Zhang Junshe. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
You are watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Still to come on our program, 4 great contemporary inventions have come to define China, some say. They are online shopping, mobile payment, shared bicycles, and high-speed rail. How have other nations benefited from China sharing these innovations? Yes, this is World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live Monday to Friday on CGTN. With just one click, one can now buy goods thousands of miles away. That is not a secret anymore, of course, for a few years already. With only a cell phone, we can survive for weeks, even months. It's a little exaggerated, but our lives are getting ever more convenient and faster. Many have attributed this to the 4 so-called modern inventions: online shopping, electric payments, shared bicycles, and high-speed rail. They may not have been born in China, but they are surely taking off from here. For example, the bikes themselves are not new, but the operating model of bike sharing has combined satellite navigation systems, mobile payment, big data, and other advanced technology. Such innovation has not only changed the lives of Chinese people, but people all over the world as well. China, which boasts pivotal inventions in ancient times, has once again demonstrated its ability to change the world. So what's the word on great invention of the modern age that have taken off in China? Really, the 4 new inventions are coming from our panelists for a discussion. Joining us, Dr. Jay Huang, who is a founding partner of J-Stone Capital and former managing director of Intel China. Welcome, sir. Also joining us here in Beijing, Duncan Clark, chairman of the BDA China, Beijing-based business consultancy. He also wrote a book about Alibaba, which is quite popular, I guess, all over the world these days. And also in New York City, we invited Max Wolf, who is a professor of economics from New School University, also chief economist at DTA. That's interesting. Okay, welcome to the 3 of you, gentlemen. We have you coming from China, from Europe, and also from the United States. Got a lot of voices here. The question is, I want to go to you, Dr. Huang, first. Are those really Chinese inventions, 4 of them?
I don't think so. If you, if you use a scale...
Did we invite the wrong guests? No, go ahead.
I think they're not truly China's invention. If you use a scale, so not a 0 to 1, but it's more than 1 to 10. I think it's maybe 1 to 100.
Explain, please.
I think the significance is though all those innovation has been very popular, and the scale is amazing, and also the widely used in China's population. That's number 1 significance. I think number 2 is the impact to the other traditional and industry or techniques is quite phenomenal. Those I think is quite unprecedented, I think, in China.
Mr. Clark?
Yes, I think we often confuse innovation with invention. I mean, invention is part of innovation, but innovation can be smaller things, micro innovations, combining business models in new ways, but they can be equally impactful. And I think Jay is right, the scale is everything. I mean, China is a laboratory that the world is looking at now, particularly in big data, or the scale of the rail infrastructure, the online shopping, the mobile and internet penetration here. I mean, I think China's internet population is bigger than the European Union population. So scale is a gating factor. But yes, they came from other places and are combined here in new ways.
Have those inventions, let's just say, even some coming back from the 1960s, let's just say shared bicycle system, right, in the Netherlands and elsewhere in Europe, have taken on a new pair of wings when they are being used and innovated here in China? Professor Wolf.
Yeah, I mean, we see that partly because the sort of evolutionary parameters and the speed of evolution is simply different inside China. It's larger, it's more dynamic, it's more rapid growth, and it's probably the largest rural to urban migration and the largest development of a middle class by total population, as well as almost by population percentage that we've ever seen. So whatever is coming into China, to what extent that comes from outside, becomes something else when China re-exports it to the world, and then it can be sort of a new product that takes the world by storm. So even if mobile payments weren't first done cell phone to cell phone inside the Chinese market, what Alibaba pushed out, or what Alipay pushes out, what's coming out of Tencent with the red envelopes, or what's coming out of Baidu, is sweeping the world and is new when it comes back to the market.
I can tell Professor Wolf must have received a lot of red envelopes through his WeChat system over there. But let me ask you about this, Clark. One of the things is, what does this mean, not only for China, but also for the rest of the world, particularly emerging and also developing economies? China has managed to do this leapfrog, as they say. You know, China lost over in the second industrial revolution, but certainly in the fourth industrial revolution, as some have argued, taking the lead in a way. So many wonder, has the style of industrialization changed? Do these days population matter? Do these days innovation matter rather than invention? What would you say, Mr. Clark?
Yeah, I think connected populations matter increasingly. I mean, if we look at the emerging markets, how China is playing a role also in building out the infrastructure. Companies like Huawei and others. Jay was working at Intel before. There was a big revolution in China in the 90s in informatization. Building the telecoms infrastructure, which then led to the internet, which led to the mobile. This is now bearing fruits, and a lot of emerging markets are looking at how China's done it, and they'll do it in different ways. But now these Chinese content providers and e-commerce providers are able to sort of lift up, if you will, in Southeast Asia and Africa and elsewhere, alongside with American and other contributors. But we have Silicon Valley, and we have Silicon Valley in China. I would say also China in Asia, because it's also Japan, Korea, but China's the real pusher of this, promoter of this new Silicon Valley, frankly, in Asia.
You could tell that because you wrote a book about Alibaba. Both Alibaba and Tencent now believed to be some of the strongest tech companies here in China. What did they say about this leapfrog process that they have taken up? And also, you think about Alibaba, for example, even in China's rural areas, there's Cuntao, very small microcredit system for the rural villagers. Yes, exactly. Yes. And if you look at Tencent, they are doing very similar things as well, any corner of China. So what would this mean? Can this model be used elsewhere in the world, Mr. Clark?
Well, we have to have the infrastructure. So we have to have the telecom infrastructure. We've seen this in Africa. It's not just in China. We've seen in M-Pesa in East Africa, for example, in payments, people leapfrog. People don't have bank accounts. They don't need them anymore. And so, China in some areas is behind, in some areas is ahead. But overall, it's about this belief in infrastructure, in technology, which is really top down in China, but also very much bottom up. People here welcome new technology. Some cultures, you have a resistance. But China's sort of almost going too far, perhaps we can say, in terms of its embrace of technology. We never get, the WeChat is happening 24 hours a day.
That's right. Too much. But Professor Wolf, when Mr. Clark was saying, well, some countries are quite reluctant, I was unintentionally looking at you at the time because, think about the United States. They say, is the U.S. really lagging behind? Is China celebrating another dream that the U.S. has never reached yet? What would you say? Is that true? Or actually we should think about it in different perspectives?
Well, certainly.
Professor.
Well, yeah, so it's a great question. I think all countries develop unequally and unevenly. I think that the Chinese have had maybe a little bit more openness to some planning, which has probably reduced the unevenness of some of the more recent periods of rapid growth. U.S., we unfortunately haven't had that, and we've had unfortunate politicization of various growth things. So if we go to our four inventions that you wisely began our discussion with, high-speed rail is certainly one in which the United States is literally 100 years behind Asian and European counterparts. And we seem to be committed to falling further behind. Unsatisfied with being 100 years behind, we're now planning to see if we can go to 120, 130 years behind. In terms of innovation, I think we've done pretty well here. But probably better at invention and then falling behind in the innovation strategy period, which is unfortunately part of the modern American reality. And we have something right now in the US, which you don't have to your benefit in China, which is a political moment in which people have decided, or some people, that the future is scary and they would like to attempt to return to the past. And that's usually difficult to do and does not usually really rapidly increase the pace of innovation.
Mr. Huang, Dr. Huang.
I think maybe all those innovation are not necessarily original coming from China. But as we talk about, the scale matters because we live in big data era. Whoever accumulate, collect a lot of data will definitely have an advantage. I think China in this regard is leading.
But the question is, can China with its own population survive alone?
I think we got enough of the population to begin with. I think I think China can do a lot more innovation based on the big data because maybe we're leading in terms of collecting a lot of data.
Agree with that, really, Mr. Clark?
Well,
China's data is enough for itself.
Chinese consumers volunteer their data all the time because they would trade their privacy for convenience. They just want less hassle in their lives. And in the US and elsewhere, people are a bit more aware and cautious. And we don't have these big players like Ali and Tencent that are really so dominant. I mean, we have Facebook, Google, and others. But Ali and Tencent are so much more dominant in the Chinese economy than those companies are.
So what are you exactly saying and suggesting here, Mr. Clark?
That
directly.
Chinese consumers are basically willing to let go of the old ways of doing things because they didn't really enjoy them very much. There was a lot of inefficiency in the system in transportation, in shopping. All that, people are willingly surrendering to these new business models, which is not always the case in the West.
Interesting. When we talk about whether it's inventions or not, we always being reminded by the so-called 4 ancient inventions made by China. China's long history has been marked with some key inventions. Most noticeably are gunpowder, paper making, printing, and the compass. Of course, those has been summed up by Joseph Needham, who is a British scientist who have been writing the civilization of science about China over the past decades. But one of the things Mr. Needham, this professor, have also been raising up is actually a fact that over the past 500 years, these 4 ancient inventions were done before the 500 years. Yet over the past 500 years, maybe not including the last 20 years, China has not yet come up with some disruptive innovation as it did with the so-called 4 ancient inventions. Mr. Clark, you're not a philosopher, a history and historian scholar, but you do have a lot of expertise in the new technologies. Help us to understand what have been contributing to the real strength of innovation or invention, and is the current China really in grasp of it? Or actually it was the ancient China that is really winning all the others?
Well, this is the big question of our time, and to some extent, where China is going.
Well, it's been there for a long time. I thought you have already got your answers, Mr. Clark.
Well, no. I mean, the fact that China is almost coming back to where it was in the world in terms of share of GDP, but also in terms of share of innovation and invention. Yes, the Needham problem, by the way, he was a Cambridge economist. I'm London School of Economics, so we have some disagreements.
Okay.
But I think there was actually, those 4 have been identified by Francis Bacon and others as like the major contributors. But actually, the reasons for that are still a matter of debate. Like, why was it the imperial system in China? Was it other issues that were going on that China failed to continue innovation? But clearly there was a gap that developed. But now, as you said, I think we have the scale, we have the top-down willingness, and increasingly we should say we have the capital. If we're talking about these shared bikes, for example, one can question how profitable this will be for the companies engaged. We see bikes littering the streets here.
Yeah.
But there is a social utility. People are getting back on bikes. I've seen people learning to ride again, which I used to see 20 years ago, but people forgot how to ride bikes,
right.
And now I see it. So, if you look at the total social context, there are some real innovations coming now that give pause for excitement, I think.
Professor Wolf?
Yeah, so I think we would tend to think that one of the important areas of invention and innovation is political organization. And when you get that wrong, it can have various qualifications, and it can make progress difficult, in some case even run in reverse. And perhaps the Chinese model deserves more attention than it always gets for interesting innovations, perhaps starting in 1978, which have reshaped what we think of as economic development policies, what we think governments working with private sectors can do, and what we think of export orientation. So I think what we define as the area of innovation and invention may need to extend beyond the simple technology of how you combine capital and labor to produce goods and services. And in that case, we've seen periods of relatively aggressive forward movement and periods of relatively aggressive backward movement in every country of the world, but
right.
notably including China as well.
Dr. Huang, there has been an argument. The reason why last 500 years, not including what Professor Wolf just said over the past 30 years, happened is that China has been cut away from the rest of the world. It is a closed country. Now, of course, it's globalization time, and China benefited from it back in the year when it joined the WTO, right? We all agree with that. But the question is, how much will connectivity with the rest of the world still benefit China in the future? You argue China's own data is enough for China already. Are you going to still follow that line, Dr. Wang?
I think it's very important for China to keep connected to the outside world, not going to a closed one. Even with a large population, we have a big data we collect on ourselves, but still China need to connect to the world, and so they can absorb all the innovation globally. If we look back in history, right, you're right, like China seems to be stalled for quite a long time, maybe over 500 years, until maybe recently, recently opened its door policy in late 70s. Right. From late 70s, we see China is moving very fast. I think if we continue working on this direction, keep opening up to the world, I think China is going to have a very good opportunity to go back to the innovation path.
That's the other question I want to ask you, Mr. Clark. That is, when you have these innovation or invention, whatever you have it, whatever use you want to use, there's another thing, which is social management system. You think about shared bikes. Of course, everybody jump on bikes these days. That's good, but they're everywhere. The traffic is getting ever more complicated, and there's lack of management system. We all know that. So I guess there is something more than just invented or innovated. You have to manage it and also make sure it is providing service 100% to the people that are supposed to benefit from it, Mr. Clark.
Absolutely. It's a matter of public policy. It's municipal. I mean, we see some of these examples in Europe, for example. Some of these Chinese bike operators are in Manchester. I think they're also in the US. Right. And suddenly this is confronting local municipalities who've invested, for example, in their own biking schemes, which are not connected. Suddenly this new thing comes along. So yes, absolutely. We have to look at utility. We need access. For those people without smartphones, for example. I mean, there are still people who have that. So yes, we're taking this dynamic China market is suddenly boiling up a lot of questions which are having a global impact. But it's not just the Silicon Valley focus. That's what's interesting. It's Silicon Valley's one source, China's another. That's an interesting development.
That's a very interesting phenomenon, isn't it, Dr. Huang?
Yes, I agree. But I think the problem you bring up is not necessarily like a showstopper, and it's probably, we can say, cost of doing business or cost of being, moving forward too fast, maybe. I think those issues can be addressed.
Professor Wolf, based on that, are we going to see different innovation, centers around the world? One is Silicon Valley, which Mr. Clark just mentioned, and the other is based mainly on size and based mainly on desire to be new and to do something new, such as China. Professor Wolf, do you think that's likely to happen in the future?
Yeah, we think it's already happening. So, I mean, it certainly will continue to happen. Southeast Asia, because of the rapid growth and the somewhat later adoption of the smartphone, has become a center of really kind of exciting and transformational new utilities. And let's remember that our 6.5 billion people around the world live under pretty different circumstances. They earn incomes differently at different quantities and qualitative periods of income earning. So they're going to need and want to interact with each other online or in the virtual world differently. And part of what's made China such a dynamic engine of innovation is that Chinese companies have figured out very well what Chinese consumers and what dynamic, fast-growing markets around the world want in ways that are sometimes very difficult or not altogether possible for an engineer sitting in San Jose, California to anticipate. But likewise, we see that spreading still further. And I think also the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities in China will begin to have some interesting innovations which are different from the large, already very international, very sort of globalized cities on the coast in China. So I think there's multiple tiers of this.
I see. Well, gentlemen, we're running out of time, but I do want to ask a very important question before we go, and brief answer from all of you. That is, when we think about, whether it's ancient invention or the new invention, different words come out. One is competitiveness, the other is pride. But to you, what really matter? And gonna matter for the long term. Let's go to Professor Wolf first, briefly.
So I think pride is very important, as is competitiveness. Pride gets people focused, unified, and gets them to excel and to give more than 100%. So it's essential, and obviously without competitiveness, you don't have endurance. So they're both equally essential, and they're part of the alchemy of real success.
Mr. Clark, do you have other words?
Yeah, I think it's partnership across markets. It's not just, we just talked about China, Silicon Valley, but it's the interplay also with third countries. We're seeing a lot in Southeast Asia, where we see companies like Amazon and Tencent and Alibaba going up against each other, also in markets like India. So it's a global game, and may the best country win.
All right. Dr. Huang.
I think pride itself, or only pride, is actually a dangerous thing. It could force people to think closely, only look at the history and backwards. I think we need openness, and then that is more important than pride.
A lot of very important words coming from these gentlemen. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Dr. Jay Huang, Mr. Duncan Clark, Professor Max Wolf. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, gentlemen. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight with Tianwei CGTN in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tianwei, and everyone on World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next week for insights across China and around the world. Before we go, check out the video of the solar eclipse across to the United States on Monday. Good night, and have a great weekend.